audience. Today I thought we could do something a bit different on the page. Today I thought we could do a book review. And I thought a book review would be really interesting because I absolutely love books. And books have been one of the ways in which I have improved the languages that I'm learning, French, Spanish, and Portuguese. It's improved my vocabulary, and it's improved my vocabulary because research has shown that our brains, we have many different areas of language acquisition. But if I tell you, for example, if I mention the word apple, probably most of our brains, they think of the image of an apple, right? You think of tasting an apple, you think of the experience of what is an apple. So I think that reading is really good because our brains are more likely to memorize and to hold these words in our long-term memory if we can put an image related to them. And books are really good for that reason. Books allow us to imagine, to think, to create almost new societies and new imaginaries. And I think this is a good way for us to memorize words, but for the long term. Because a lot of the times we begin reading or we begin learning a language and we forget the word the next week or the next month, we've already forgotten. So I think that books are a really good way to do this. Another good thing about books, or another reason to read more books in the languages that you're studying, is because you can see the structure of the language. You can see how the language will probably be spoken. And in English, mostly, in spoken English and written English, there's not much variation. Usually, of course, there's informal English and formal English, but usually the formal English that's spoken is very similar to written English. So I think if you want to understand the structure of the language, subject, verb, object, those types of things, reading can be really good for you to learn how to replicate this in speaking. And another really good thing, the third thing that I think is really good about reading books, is learning idioms. Learning idioms are fantastic because it's the way that we speak, it's the way that we use the language, and it's one of the most colorful expressions of language. So I think that reading can absolutely open up these windows for people who are interested in perfecting their languages, learning more, increasing their vocabulary, as well as being able to reproduce the structure of the language, not only being able to understand it written, but as well as spoken. So today I thought that we could talk about a book that is it's a book that I read recently, and the name of the book is called Things Fall Apart. The author's name is Chinua Achebe. So Chinua Achebe, he was a Nigerian author from the south of Nigeria, from an ethnic group called Igbo, the Igbo people of Nigeria. And Chinua Achebe, he was raised during the colonization period of Nigeria by the British. So throughout Achebe's life, you can see that missionaries come over, they implement many different social, political changes and political changes into the community. And Chinua is oriented to these things. There's interviews when he's mentioned that some of his family members were some of the first families or the first people that were actually evangelized by the missionaries. So he lives in this environment, this shock of reality. So the book talks mostly about this shock, these two realities, or these two different cultures that are colliding together almost. The invasion of the British people in Nigeria, specifically within the villages of the Igbo people. So the book, very specifically, it talks about the life of the main character, whose name is Okonkwo. And Okonkwo is a very strong man. He's a warrior, he's a wrestler, he has a lot of wives and a lot of land. But at the same time, Okonkwo he's almost a tragic hero because he also has a lot of internal questions. He was raised in a household where his father is not a man who has many titles. He's not so prosperous in the community. And his father is almost the opposite, actually. His father is known as a very lazy man. People in the communities, they almost emasculate him almost as a woman because he's seen as lazy. He has a lot of debt to other people in the community. And Okonkwo vows to never be this type of man. So we'll see throughout the book a ton of things happen that makes Okonkwo a tragic figure. He inherits almost a son, almost similar to a son. You will see these dynamics. I don't want to ruin the book for those of you who haven't read the book. Many other things that happen throughout Okonkwo's life, where he's actually exiled from the community, and it's at this point that you can see that the missionaries are beginning to grow in number and grow in power. And then Okonkwo comes back, and a host of other things happen. So the book mostly talks about this. Fear is something that is highly present. We can see that in many of the characters, they're fearful of many different things. You can see they're fearful of the ancestors, or of the traditional gods, or of the Western Christian God, or maybe the missionaries. They're fearful of the Igbo people. The Igbo people are fearful of the missionaries. The question of fear is very prevalent in the book. And I wanted to read a quote from the book that actually highlights this dynamic. Specifically with Okonkwo. Okonkwo ruled his household with a heavy hand. His wives, especially the youngest, lived in perpetual fear of his fiery temper, and so did his little children. Perhaps down in his heart, Okonkwo was not a cruel man, but his whole life was dominated by fear, the fear of failure and of weakness. It was deeper and more intimate than the fear of evil and capricious gods of magic, the fear of the forest and the forces of nature, malevolent, red in tooth and claw. Okonkwo's fear was greater than these. It was not external, but lay deep within himself. It was the fear of himself, lest he should be seen to resemble his father. So I thought this part of the book was very interesting in showing exactly how tragic of a hero, or how tragic Okonkwo's situation is. There's a very complex character development. I love the way that Achebe talks about these internal questions, and he does a really great job of humanizing these characters within a context where the missionaries don't humanize them. They don't see their cultures as valid, their traditions as valid, and they almost see them as, they absolutely see them as evil, and that their traditions are not valid because they're not from the Christian religion. So I thought this was a beautiful part of the book. Okonkwo is also a very problematic figure. You can see that in many parts of the book. He's very violent, he's abusive, but he also has these other characteristics that make us problematize Okonkwo in general. Another part of the book, or another analysis that I had of the book that maybe you all would find interesting as well, is this question of the internal versus the external. And this is also very evident within the book, specifically with the relationship between the British missionaries that come to the Igbo community and the Igbo people themselves. You can see that these internal versus external conflicts are very apparent in the book. There's certain Igbo people that begin to join the church, and they have a lot of conflict because they're almost won over, because the missionaries use some very different types of tactics, right? The missionaries, they optimize on some of the traditions, or the things that some of the Igbo people may or may not love about the Igbo traditions, and they optimize on these things in order to change the structure of, or in order to evangelize the Christian religion to the Igbo people. So you can see this dynamic. You can also see this internal and external dynamic with Okonkwo. You can see that he's struggling with a lot of questions of what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a man within the Igbo society? What does it mean to preserve the traditions and the culture of the Igbo people? And to see these things being changed by the missionaries. So you can see these internal struggles within Okonkwo, and in terms of how his family sees these questions, or certain members of his family, and as well as the community. You can see the internal and external dynamics. It's very present in other aspects of the book as well. And I would actually leave this question to you all. What are the internal and external dynamics that you find interesting in the book, or something that I may have not mentioned? What did you find to be another one of those relationships in the book? So I would like to finish this book review by saying this is the first book review, so any Any other book suggestions, I would love to hear them. It can be fiction and non-fiction. But I would also like to finish the book review by talking about this role of colonization, right? It's mentioned in, well, colonization in general was, it's a social, economic, and political project that lasted, you know, from the late 1800s for most places until probably the mid 20th century. But I would like to propose this question. How do you think the 3 C's are prominent within the book? For those of you who may or may not know the 3 C's, the 3 C's was the implementation of commerce, Christianity, and colonization. Colonization being the political changes within the structure. So for you all, how do you think these 3 C's are present in the book? How does Chinua Achebe talk about these things? Do you think that he does how do you feel about the ways in which he engages in these questions of the 3 C's? So, any other questions that you would also like to raise about the book or suggestions, I'm all ears, let me know. And until the next time, until the next book review. Bye-bye.